Ever heard about a birthday party where the guest of honor just vanishes, like totally disappears? It's what happened to Tyler Goodrich back in November 2023 in Nebraska. Poof, gone. Today we're going to dive deep into this whole thing. It's super weird.
Yeah, the whole country was talking about it for a while. There were tons of theories. We're going to be using this podcast episode, Missing in America, they called it, Running Man, to try and make sense of it. It gets pretty wild.
You know what got me about this podcast? It makes Tyler feel like a real person, like you could have bumped into him at the store. They talk about him being a really good guy.
Oh, absolutely. They start off talking about when he was a little kid, just full of energy, always helping people out. They even said he used to bring his neighbors extra veggies from his parents' garden.
That's the kind of stuff that gets to you. It makes you realize this was a real guy with a real life, and then boom, gone.
Exactly. And the podcast goes through his life a bit. His marriage to this guy, Marshall, having kids, getting sober. It gives you a picture of what his life was like before everything went sideways.
And then comes November 3rd, 2023. A regular Friday, right? Tyler's talking to his friend Amanda about their weekend plans. Then later, there's a fight with Marshall, a 911 call, and that's it. Nobody sees Tyler again.
That's where things get murky. The podcast goes through the whole investigation, the searches, nothing on his bank accounts. And get this, they found video footage of someone running from the house that night.
Oh.
But it's shadowy. They can't even tell for sure if it's Tyler.
Like a blurry figure or something?
Yeah, super grainy, far away. Some people think it's him, like Amanda and Marshall. They say they recognize the way he runs. But Tyler's own father, Lonnie, he says, no way, that's not my son. Can you imagine not even knowing if that's your kid running away on camera?
That's rough.
Yeah.
And while this is all happening, nobody can reach Tyler. Straight to voicemail. Everyone's freaking out, searching, putting up the flyers. But there's one person who's acting a little strange. Marshall, his husband.
The podcast talks about that, yeah. How he wasn't really helping with the search at first.
Yeah, they said he wouldn't go look for Tyler, and he wanted a lawyer before talking to the cops. The internet was going nuts. Everyone thought he was hiding something.
Marshall said he stayed home to keep his kids out of the media craziness, to protect them since everything was so messed up. I guess it makes sense, but it definitely raised some eyebrows.
So we've got a missing guy, a maybe Tyler running away on camera, and a husband who's acting shady. What happens next?
Well, Marshall finally talks to the investigators, with his lawyer, of course. But here's the thing. He claims that Tyler was abusive sometimes, like physically and emotionally.
Whoa, that's a big accusation, especially since Tyler can't say anything to defend himself. What did his family and friends think about that?
They were furious, understandably. Tyler's sister Felicia called Marshall's claims messed up, said you can't know the whole truth without hearing both sides. They did mention that Tyler had a domestic violence charge from an old relationship, but it got dropped.
So now there's even more confusion. Was there abuse? Did it just happen once, or was it a regular thing? It's all just Marshall's word. It's hard not to be suspicious.
Right. And all of Tyler's friends say that old incident happened before he got sober. That he was a completely different person after that. Super loving and supportive, they say, totally contradicts Marshall's story.
So who do you believe? That's a tough one. Did the investigators find anything to back up Marshall's story?
Nope, no police reports or anything from their house. But Marshall says he recorded their last fight. To protect himself, he said, in case Tyler tried to blame him for something. The cops listened to it, but they haven't released it. They said it sounded more like an argument than anything violent.
So we're left with these stories that don't match up, a ton of questions, and this feeling like we're missing huge chunks of the truth. Where do we go from here?
It's easy to get lost in all the drama, who said what, who's lying, all that internet stuff. But the main thing is a guy is missing, and we still don't know why.
There was this one thing that really got me. Weeks after Tyler disappeared, his sister, Felicia, she brought in those scent dogs, the ones trained to find people. And they both went to the same spot, right on the road, not far from the house.
Yeah, makes you wonder, doesn't it? Like, did he get into a car there? It's like something out of a movie. But then again, those dogs came weeks later. How reliable can they be after so long?
The podcast mentioned that, actually. The cops didn't think much of the dog thing. They said the scent could be all messed up by then. Or the dogs could be picking up something totally unrelated to Tyler.
Shows you how tricky these investigations can be. You see those dogs on TV and it seems so simple. But in real life, it's way more complicated. So many things can throw those dogs off. The weather, other smells, all kinds of stuff.
It's a good reminder that real life isn't like those crime shows. Things aren't always so clear-cut. Sometimes you just don't get a straight answer.
Right. And then there's that video, the one we talked about. Some people are positive it's Tyler running away, others are just as sure it's not him. It's all about how you see it, how you interpret things. And when you're dealing with something this emotional, it's tough to be objective.
Like we're all trying to solve a puzzle, but we have different pieces, and some might even be missing.
That's a good way to put it. And with these missing person cases, it's not just a game, you know? There are real people hurting, desperate for answers.
In Tyler's case, it blew up online. The podcast talked about that. People were all over it trying to figure it out, pointing fingers. It just makes everything more chaotic, doesn't it?
Totally. Social media can be helpful, getting the word out, finding leads, but it can also turn into this rumor mill, and that's got to be hard on the people involved.
Sounds like it drove a wedge between Tyler's family and Marshall. They were each accusing the other of making things worse online.
Yeah, that happens a lot in these situations, unfortunately. Marshall thought some of Tyler's family were stirring up all the hate against him. They said they just wanted to find Tyler and couldn't control what other people were saying. It's sad, they were already dealing with a missing person, and now they're fighting with each other.
So where does that leave the investigation? Does the cops have any solid leads?
Not really. They say Marshall's just a witness, not a suspect. But a lot of people aren't buying it. They confirmed Tyler's phone and wallet are gone. No bank activity either. It's like he vanished into thin air. And that just fuels the conspiracy theories, you know?
There's this quote from Tyler's dad in the podcast that really stuck with me. He said, "Whenever Tyler sent a card, he always wrote this long message, pouring his heart out, no matter what the card was for. I miss that." It's so simple, but you can feel the pain in those words.
It reminds you that there are real people behind all this, trying to cope with this horrible loss. They're left with all these questions, broken relationships, and not knowing what happened.
And what about Marshall? The podcast gives his side of the story, too. He swears he didn't have anything to do with Tyler's disappearance. But then there are the abuse claims, that recording of their fight. It's hard to make sense of it all.
That's the tough part, isn't it? We've got all these different versions of the story, conflicting details, and hardly any clear answers. It makes you realize we don't always know everything, no matter how hard we try.
Yeah, it can be frustrating. But it also shows that real life isn't like a TV show. There are loose ends, things that don't get tied up neatly, and that what if feeling can stick with you for a long time. But even without all the answers, we can still learn something from cases like this, can't we?
Definitely. By looking at all the different angles, the evidence, the impact on the people involved, we can understand how complicated these cases are. We see the challenges the investigators face, how the media and the public react, how everyone gets affected by it.
It makes you think about the real people behind the mystery, behind the headlines. Their lives are turned upside down. And even though we may never know for sure what happened to Tyler Goodrich, his story reminds us how fragile life is, how much we need to understand these things, even when they don't make sense.
And that's really what the deep dive is all about. We dig into these real-life mysteries, not just to find the truth, but to explore the gray areas, the unanswered questions, and the human side of things. We want to go beyond the sensationalism.
So we've spent a lot of time talking about all the details of Tyler Goodrich's disappearance, the different stories, the evidence, and how it's affected everyone. But the big question is, what actually happened to him?
Yeah, that's the one everyone wants to know, right? And the truth is, we don't have any proof. All we can do is look at the theories and see if any of them make sense.
Let's do that. One theory the podcast brought up was that maybe Tyler just took off, started a new life somewhere else. Is that even possible, knowing what we know about him?
It's not impossible. But everyone who was close to Tyler says no way. They talk about how much he loved his family and friends, especially his kids. They say he'd never just abandon them like that.
Plus, he left all his stuff behind. His phone, his wallet. Doesn't seem like something you'd do if you were planning to disappear, right?
Exactly. And that brings us to another theory the investigators looked at, the accident angle. Tyler was a runner, so maybe something happened to him while he was out that night.
Yeah, he was running in the dark. It's not hard to imagine something bad happening. Maybe you tripped, got hurt, ended up somewhere nobody's looked yet.
Could be. But again, there's no evidence to support that, no signs of a struggle or anything. Nobody saw him running that night either.
And then there's the theory that's really scary to think about, but we can't ignore it. Could someone have hurt Tyler?
That's a dark thought. But with so few answers, it has to be considered. The podcast talked about the possibility of a hit and run. Maybe the driver freaked out and hid Tyler's body. Or maybe something even worse happened.
It's hard not to let your mind go there. When there's no evidence, all those scary possibilities start to seem real. And without an answer, We're stuck with this feeling of not knowing.
That's what makes missing person cases so tough, especially the ones that get a lot of attention. We want a clear answer, like in those crime shows on TV. But real life is messy. Sometimes you never get that closure.
It's frustrating, yeah. But it also reminds you that we can't always know everything. Sometimes the hardest thing is living with the mystery.
Think about the families of missing people. They're always wondering, always questioning themselves, feeling guilty that they didn't do more. That's going to be a huge weight to carry for years, maybe even forever.
It's not just the families either. Cases like this affect the whole community. People start to feel less safe, like it could happen to them too. It makes you think about how vulnerable we all are.
What's interesting about Tyler's case is how much people were talking about it online. All the theories and speculation, it shows how much people are drawn to true crime. We love trying to solve puzzles, figure out the things that seem impossible to explain.
And it shows how powerful storytelling can be. That Missing in America podcast, it did a really good job of laying out all the different sides, the facts, the things we don't know. It sucks you right in.
That's what's great about a deep dive like this. It's not just about finding the answer. It's about exploring the complicated parts, the questions that don't have answers, and the human stories behind it all.
We've covered a lot of ground today, but we still don't know what happened to Tyler Goodrich. What we do know is that investigations are hard, social media can make things even more confusing, and these cases really mess people up.
Tyler's case is still open. Maybe someday new evidence will come up and we'll finally know the truth. But for now, we can only think about the people who loved him and how much they're hurting. And remember that life is precious and can change in an instant.
Sometimes the biggest mysteries are the ones that never get solved. They make us realize that we don't have all the answers, and that sometimes the search for meaning is more important than finding a solution. And that's what the deep dive is all about. We explore these real complicated stories and encourage you to think for yourselves, question what you hear, and keep the conversation going. If you like these kinds of deep dives, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Until next time, keep those minds curious, and remember, there's always more to discover beneath the surface.